Hello and welcome to another episode of Unfulfilled. I'm your host, Luke Plain, and today I'm joined by Tom from WIRO. Tom is the founder of WIRO. He set up a design studio in 2016, which has evolved into an e-commerce agency with exceptional reputation within the Shopify community. WIRO are an industry-leading and award-winning Shopify Plus agency, and delivering higher value growth strategies, CX design and Shopify Plus development solutions to provide awesome websites for their D2C merchants across home and lifestyle sectors. Today we're going to delve into the history of the agency, the good, the bad, the ugly, the awards which WIRO have won, the pain points of growing the agency, and we'll probably discuss some football at some point as well, especially as Tom's a big Ipswich fan. So, Tom, that's quite a big intro, mate, but tell people who don't know who you are a bit more about yourself, please.
Yeah, so as you said, Tom, the founder of WIRO, we're an e-commerce agency. We came from a design studio background and have moved into the e-commerce sphere in recent years, probably 3 or 4 years now. Things are going really, really nicely. Historically, perhaps not so nicely in a in a period of growth and demand when you're not geared up for it, where I think a lot of small businesses probably get to where they're not really ready for all the business that they then end up with, and the knock-on effect is you learn from a lot of mistakes. But the business is in a really, really good position now, working with a lot of home and lifestyle brands within the e-com space.
Nice. Tell me more about your background, Tom. Why did you set up the business? What is it that made you take that leap?
Yeah, so I was doing freelance design work. I was working with a lot of my dad's friends. My dad had a business, or still has a business, and was working with a lot of them to kind of make a little bit of money on the side. I was at college and working for my dad at the time, and it was like, I love design. I wanted to go into graphic design. I was doing graphic design and marketing for them and his company. But I wanted to do it for an array of clients, and kind of wanted my own clients too, wanted to go off and make my own money. So yeah, that's kind of how I got into it.
Yeah. And what was the transition from doing that design setup into more like e-com focus within sort of Shopify Plus?
Yeah, so it was me and a couple of freelancers, and we were doing a lot of design for print work. We were doing some brand identity work, none of which, for the record, we do now, but it was kind of where we started versus where we are now. What we were finding was we'd be doing loads of web design stuff for B2B, for service-based brands, for small companies and that kind of thing. However, we were getting asked more and more for, can you produce us a website? We want to be selling online. Everything that we're doing now, but at the time it was just a small proportion of what we were doing, and it was kind of beginning to be more and more. And actually we found that our customers loved Shopify, their customers loved Shopify, the team loved working on Shopify, and we were working on all these other platforms, so WordPress, WooCommerce, Squarespace, Magento, all these other frameworks that weren't so enjoyable to design and build on, and that we found we wanted to do way more of and less of the other stuff. And actually there was good money in the e-commerce side of things. People were expecting almost like a lot less of you for willing to pay a lot more for it, if that makes sense. And actually we found that we wanted to kind of stop taking the design work, the brand work that we were doing that wasn't web related, so flyers, banners, you name it, like design and print collateral. We were doing it at the time. We decided actually we don't want to be doing this stuff anymore, and that actually we want to put all our heart and soul into e-commerce websites, basically. So we doubled down on working with Shopify, stopped taking on all the other builds, and we kind of branched out our partners, if you like, so working with other people that wanted to do the B2B side of things, but actually it wasn't our bag. We didn't want to do it anymore, so that we just found people that we could either outsource the work to, or that we just ended up kind of giving introductions to. So that's pretty much where we're at now, is if we get leads like that, we just pass them on to partners that might be a better fit, because actually we're not the best fit for them. So yeah, that's how we kind of transitioned away from being B2B and kind of broader business focused in kind of design and print and websites, and actually got rid of the print, got rid of the design, just went into kind of websites only, and then doubled down again into purely being e-commerce focused, and eventually Shopify and Shopify Plus focused only.
Nice. So it's been a transition into that. It wasn't like a plan from the start. It was what's transitioned into it and what you've almost enjoyed the most and got the most out of.
Yeah, I think it was an evolution of where the business was, and I think the changing world as well with the likes of COVID that happened, and it forced a lot of people that hadn't actually got an online presence for one, but also haven't got an online store where they needed one because shops were being forced to shut. Basically, it forced a lot of people down into producing some form of online either presence or e-commerce site. So we were very fortunate during that phase to be in kind of the digital space that we are, because it allowed us to help a lot of other companies and brands that weren't yet online get online or evolve the presence that they already had. So yeah, it wasn't ever the plan to become like this e-commerce agency or to focus purely on websites. It was almost that we were more so in design, brand identity and graphic design, and actually it was the natural evolution that print was beginning to die. More and more people wanted an online presence. We had the capabilities to do so, and actually we didn't want to do the design, the print, the business cards, like the flyers, the leaflets and stuff that we were doing historically, and actually we wanted to move into this evolving digital space.
Yeah, a bit more sexy in terms of work you're actually producing, basically.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's why we love what we do now. Is every client, every brand that we work with, the UI is very, very different, and there's different strategies and tech partners and different things involved with each part of the process. And I think that is still why I got into doing what I do, is that I loved working with a mix of clients, and whilst there's a lifestyle element to it and you make your own money and you have your own business, like it was having the broad mix of, we can work with a footwear brand and then we can go and work with a luxury high-end brand at the same time, have calls on the same day in the same afternoon or whatever, but it's completely different brands, and that's what we liked. I love fashion, shoes, clothes and stuff, big into watches and that kind of thing too. So when you can work with brands like that like ultimately, I don't know, tick the boxes that you like that's quite rewarding too, to work with brands that ultimately you buy as well. That's cool.
Yeah, and that probably helps in that buying, doesn't it, when you're doing that research piece at the start, when you're learning more about what they're about, and you can talk about probably like maybe your journey that you've used a website previously, or you've bought from a shop, or the look and feel of a watch. Like, it makes a big difference, doesn't it? Yeah,
it definitely helps when you've either had that experience with a similar brand, or when actually you've bought from that brand. I think you can actually give like a real life example of your experience having bought with them in the past versus what we can do to change things for customers moving forwards.
Yeah. You mentioned at the top of this that you've been through some, you've learned a lot, let's say, in the years you've been doing this.
Yeah.
Like, can you elaborate on that in terms of like, what are the biggest learns you've had from your time to where you are now? Because it's sort of 7-8 years in terms of the business now, isn't it, in terms of the age?
Yeah, I think there's several learnings. I think one of which was not being geared up for the serious kind of growth that we had during the COVID era. We didn't have a lot of processes. There was kind of a lack of accountability and responsibilities within our very kind of loose team at the time. We didn't have much structure. We didn't have much hierarchy. We didn't have like responsibilities on who kind of sat with what. It was very much like everyone kind of mucked in, whereas actually as the team grows, you can't have so much of that. And although we kind of came from being a small business to now quite a, I don't know, much more serious kind of operation, you have to have process in place, and you have to have responsibilities and accountabilities on each of the people within the team, and you can't have that overlap, because as soon as you've got that overlap, there's blurred lines between who has what responsibility within a set task or a set client, for example. So yeah, I think that's one. We definitely weren't geared up for the demand during COVID. Like, we didn't know that it was going to have such a positive effect on us. Although it was such a negative thing at the time, it was great for our business, looking back. I think another big learning is that in the early days, now we've been in business for, coming up to 8 years, the agency kind of rebranded around 3 or 4 years ago. And actually, had we have repositioned as an agency in the earlier days, I think we would have had this growth a lot earlier on. And actually, we might be 2 or 3 years ahead. And perhaps another one is that I think we could have hired a lot sooner and spread some of the... I think when you're in early days of business, you're very much like, I can do it all myself. I can keep my overheads low. If I'm doing it, it's not costing me. And actually, I think valuing your own time more and leveraging freelancers, outsource support, an assistant, anything to help basically leverage your time, because your time is potentially better spent elsewhere or can provide more value elsewhere. So I think, yeah, in hindsight, I could have hired earlier on. We had freelancers and stuff that were helping, but perhaps we could have doubled down on that and actually done more. Yeah, I think those are some learnings from the last few years of some serious growth.
Yeah. Can you talk through that in terms of the growth? Like, I don't know what you tell me in terms of, talk to me about that. Like, how much are you happy to give away in terms of that growth you've had? Like, what does that look like from the outside point of view?
Yeah, I mean, we talk about growth internally from several different kind of elements. One, financial growth. Two, team size and growth. We also look at our kind of brand awareness, positioning, and how we're kind of deemed in the market, because we found that a lot of other plus agencies and a lot of other people in the Shopify space that 2 or 3 years ago might not have known who WIRO were, now begin to kind of put us in the top and within other conversations of proposals, of pitches that are being had with other agencies. Like, we're coming up in those conversations. We're often coming up against the same agencies when we're proposing and pitching for work. So that's nice and rewarding for us. Was that years ago when we were kind of positioning ourselves, branding and marketing ourselves, was like, who is the pinnacle at the top of the game in terms of like the Shopify Plus space? Where do we want to be in a few years' time? To like now be in that is quite rewarding. So for us, like, we kind of deem that as growth. Financial growth, like, we have had really, really successful year-on-year growth ever since the business was formed. We've kind of like doubled and doubled and doubled, which is great. I think this year is kind of a record year for us, and especially over the summer months. I think whilst a lot of agencies we were talking to had really quiet periods over summer, we'd had a really, really kind of good summer. We've had several builds come in. I think we've had 4 or 5 projects come in, and for the last few months we've had between 1 and 2 retainers starting each month. So over the last 3 months, retainer and recurring revenue, which is obviously really rewarding for the business, especially going into next year, is in a really, really good position. So that's been great. And I think perhaps just kind of going back to your learnings, not having that responsibility. So whilst the team has grown and grown, after COVID, we kind of stripped back because we had the massive demand and kind of, huge demand internally for what we were trying to achieve project-wise for clients. But because we didn't have the hierarchy, the structure, the accountability of the responsibilities internally, we actually stripped that back. We ran a really core, lean team for quite a while, just whilst we worked hard to get our processes in place, build the structure, the hierarchy within the team, and then we built back the team slowly. So that's been quite rewarding, whilst at the time it felt as if we were almost going a bit backwards, having built and established a team of like 15, 16 of us. It felt as if we were going the wrong way when we kind of went back down to 7 or 8 of us. But actually it was the best thing we ever did. And in hindsight, again, after COVID, the best thing that ever happened. It just would have been nice to have been geared up, ready for that success prior to kind of COVID hitting us, because it would have meant that actually we would have had much more success and been able to sustain it off the back of COVID. But actually we found that it was great in a way because it almost helped fund, with the projects coming in, it helped fund the team that's now kind of to be, and also allowed us to fund putting the processes in place, the operations, the tools, the systems, which had we have not had it, perhaps we wouldn't now have. So that's been good and really rewarding. So yeah, in terms of growth, it's now in much more of a sustainable, scalable position, where actually, because we have process in place, it means that going into next year, because the recurring revenue is there in terms of like monthly retained spend from clients, that mixed with the processes, the operations and everything in place, like we're in a really, really good position going into next year. So I think that's what we deem as kind of successful, or success and as growth, I guess.
Yeah. Has it been ever like during that time, was there ever a oh crap moment, like what are we doing here? Or like, was there like a moment where you're like hand in hands? Or I guess there are quite a lot of this, like I've only been going for a number of months and I've had it a few times already, let alone over 8 years. But can you talk through like one of them like oh my God moments, or the dark times as well?
Yeah. I think there's definitely a lot of them, and I think I've done a lot of coaching and mentoring since, so you learn to adapt and deal with those a lot better, and like stress is a lot less now because we kind of take a step back. I think the more time we spend out of the business, you realise it's actually a lot better than what it almost seems on a day-to-day. It's easy to be very reactive and to go, oh shit, like this is happening, or I don't know, this is going to be really problematic. I think it's quite easy to fall in the trap of dwelling on that, when actually in hindsight, looking back, you can kind of laugh on it now. Internally, we send ourselves a lot of future emails. So we'll be writing an email now to receive later on in the year, for example, so that we can reflect and look back around like what worked and what didn't. I'll have to dig one out. But yeah, we do that to kind of put into reality, like, although it seems bad now, when we send it to ourselves and we look back in 3 years or 3 months time, for example, we'll be wetting ourselves with like what actually we deemed was bad at the time versus what's actually bad now. But yeah, I mean, we've had bad times. We've had builds that internally we've been thinking, yeah, we're ready to go live with this. We get to go live and actually like is nowhere near the state at what we needed it to be live. But again, that was before we had any of the processes in place. So now we have checks, we have pre-flight kind of tests and stuff that we do. QA internally is brilliant. Things that 3 years ago we didn't have in place, but going live with one of the biggest builds that we've ever worked on, and actually we're in no position in which like this site should be going live. In hindsight, you can laugh about it now, but at the time it wasn't funny at all. Like we were all shitting ourselves. Like, how is the client going to react? Internally, like it was getting heated. Like it was not good. But yeah, that's part and parcel of it. It was definitely part and parcel of the huge demand at the time for working with big clients and working on big projects, but not having the team, the structure, the process, like really that was in the right place for where the projects were, if that makes sense. It was the right projects and we were positioning right at the time in terms of where we wanted the agency. But the team, the structure, the processes, the lack of accountability, it was a bit of a flop 3-4 years ago. However, like fast forward 3-4 years, we're in a really, really good position now where that just would not happen. And if it does, there's things that we do now on a weekly basis. So we do team retrospectives, so retros on a Friday afternoon where we go back over what worked well in the week, what didn't work so well, what's holding us back, and basically where are we trying to get to. So for 50 weeks of the year, we're constantly reflecting on the week before, which is great. And I know a lot of agencies would kind of book that time in. It's not a call that is necessarily important because it's not a client or a internal project meeting. Therefore, it kind of gets put on the back burner, it gets pushed back. Whereas it's something that isn't a non-negotiable every single week we do. Unless, for example, there is so much absence within the team that it's not viable to do it. If 4 or 5 of them are off, then it's something we potentially skip. But if not, we're very keen on keeping it in place. We also do project post-mortem, so we learn from the mistakes on the post-project to ensure that it doesn't happen on the next project, because it's very easy to take those mistakes and just to go and do them on the next one. So that's something that we're quite keen to do more of as well. We haven't implemented it on a retainer kind of way of working at the moment. It's only really on our builds and our projects that we do it. However, I think we're looking to introduce something from that side of things too, to ensure that retainers, any issues, any mistakes, anything that we can basically learn from, aren't then kind of adopted within our, I don't know, a new retainer that we onboard. Some of it is kind of resolved as part of the weekly retrospectives, because we basically have a project team and we have a retainer team. So a lot of that comes up in conversation. Processes are then resolved. So it's slightly different with retainer, and perhaps that's why we don't have one at the moment, is that ultimately the conversations being had in the retrospect at the end of the week around what did and didn't work, and then it's being fed back in process. So yeah, now looking back on my comment around why it doesn't exist, that's probably why.
And going back to what you mentioned probably a few questions ago now, you talked about looking forward like 2-3 years as like these are the pinnacle in what we do, like we would become like in their bracket. How do you do that? Like, what is it you were trying to get to? Like, is it the slickness of how they do the processes? Is it the sort of brands they're sort of winning, or is it the output of their websites? What is it you're trying to like gain on in terms of all those competitors?
I think there's a combination of things that we constantly... So we do a sailboat, as part of our retrospect on a Friday, we do what's called a sailboat retro, where we have an island, which is ultimately where we're trying to get to. We have the wind that carries us. We have the rocks, which are kind of holding us back, or anchors, which are holding us back, and rocks, which are potential risk. On the island is profitability. So how can we do what we're doing more efficiently? That's not to say that we have to run it at 90% profitability, for example, but where are we wasting, and where can we be more efficient within process, within team, within spend that's allocated towards budget of a project, for example. We have stress. So how can we reduce? So every week we talk about how can we reduce stress internally? How can we make projects as enjoyable for both the client and for both our team, so that we're clocking off at 4 o'clock. We're not having to message the team at 7 or 8 o'clock because we have an issue. If we have annual leave, for example, we're having to say, look, where did you leave this, for example? So we put, again, more process in place. We have handovers, we have handbacks when team come back from leave. We have kind of your snoozing hours within Slack. Like, we don't expect the team to be about late in the day. We set expectation within our SLAs and make it very, very clear to our clients that between this hour and this hour, these are our core working hours. Between these hours, this is when our team are working. And within these hours, we're not going to be reachable. And if you do, and you have an issue, like, this is when it's going to be picked up on. And we have processes in place to ensure that if we have P1s through to P5s, so high priority tasks that need to be worked on out of hours, like, we have a process and a procedure to how that's handled. So those things as part of that retro are very much things that we look kind of to do, to reduce and to kind of improve on each week. So there's profitability, the culture, and improving the culture and the team dynamic, and how do we do that, and some of the stress, and that kind of comes into that. If we can reduce that, we improve the dynamic within the team, and we make it much more of a place people want to be and kind of be a part of, and a team that people want to be a part of, and something we can preach about to acquire and attract new talent. But in terms of where we look to, in terms of competitors and clients, we look at what other agencies are doing, who doesn't. But yeah, we look around how they position themselves, around ultimately the kind of clients that they're wanting to work with, and that ultimately we want to work with. What are our passions? Yeah, who do we really want to work with within the space? Because ultimately, if we're working with brands that we don't want to work with, it's not kind of fulfilling or ticking that box. Pardon the pun.
Yeah. it's a fantastic business name. Yeah, cheers. I appreciate that. That's that shout out to the guys at Unearth for all their work they've done with our branding. So I guess talking about like partnerships and stuff, then you've already touched on it a little bit. Like, how important has collaboration been for yourself with regards to partnering with other agencies and tech partners? Like, talk me through how you work with that, please.
Yeah, for us, it's been massive. It's been probably the biggest marketing lever that we've got within the business. So we don't focus a lot of time on low-hanging fruit. For example, like, I've spoken on other podcasts around how we haven't done too much around paid advertising or SEO on our own website, which sounds awful as a digital agency. But for us, it's not the power of what we're trying to achieve. We're trying to achieve better relationships with other agencies that complement the services that we provide and that they provide, working with the same kind of clients. So we have two pools of partners. We have tech partners, so the partners that we're leveraging and building into our core stack of tools that we use to build out client sites. And then we have agency partners, which are agencies providing complementary service, which may or may not be working with exactly the same client base. So, for example, we have agencies that be working with e-commerce clients, which are exactly the right fit for us, and that they're providing SEO services, paid marketing, performance, anything like that. We're a great recommendation from that agency to us to service that same brand. And then we're also working with other agencies that, again, do all of that, but they might be working with B2B clients predominantly, but they get a small proportion of work come through that might be e-commerce focused. And that's where the introduction is being made. So for us, those partnerships have been super, super valuable. And ultimately, what's probably grown our business the most is word of mouth referrals from those, because those leads are coming in pretty hot. And it means that we can work in parallel with them, with their clients, and then we get more and more clients with that agency. So We've got some that we've got 25 mutual clients between us in terms of clients that we leverage. A couple of them service like from an SEO perspective. Some of them service that client through paid marketing or performance marketing. And yeah, that's worked really, really well. So whilst we can push other things and we can go and pump a load of money into paid ads and that kind of thing, that's just not where we've decided to spend our time and our money. I think eventually, like, we will allocate some spend to that just to kind of tick the box for that low hanging fruit, as we say. But at the moment, it's not something in the 7 or 8 years of business like that we've allocated any budget to, just because it's been more valuable to build partnerships. And ultimately, the paid, if we were to go and do some SEO or we go and do some paid performance marketing, for example, it's tapping into a market that we don't necessarily want. Like, those are the people looking for a cheap Shopify agency, for example, whereas actually we want to work with people that value the skills and the services that we can provide, and those clients are currently already working with other agencies. So if a referral can be made from another agency to another agency, it's highly likely that we're going to be able to close that client. So yeah, partnerships have been brilliant for us, and as I say, the biggest lever in terms of marketing for the agency in the 7 or 8 years, well, definitely the last 3 or 4 years.
And e-com seems to be leading the way in that, in terms of what I've seen, like partnerships, and actually, talking about the e-com collab club, which is, something that a lot of this audience probably knows a lot about, is being able to sit in that room and talk to another agency about the problems they're having or stuff they're doing really well, which helps you learn and develop and improve process. Like the stuff you're talking about, like the post-mortem of projects and the weekly sort of calls. Like, I'm guessing you've implemented that through conversations and you've learnt that through other sort of business owners as well. Like, is that sort of how you've came up with these sort of things you're doing?
Yeah, we do a lot of research. We have a lot of conversations. We kind of explore what other agencies are doing. However, what we found with a lot of other agencies still don't have a lot of standard processes in place, which again is quite rewarding for us, because we feel as if we're in a good place compared to where some of those are, where they don't often have some of those processes in place. But there are a lot of agencies that do have them in place. So yeah, a lot of conversations are being had with other operations kind of managers or founders within the agencies to establish how did they come to where they are, what problems did they have, because often we're having the same problems, for example, that we can kind of educate one another on, that we implemented this, it was a game changer for that. Done several roundtables and that kind of thing too, where we've spoken with other Shopify agency owners in the room, where we've been explaining that we've implemented this, it solved this problem, and we wouldn't change it or go back to where we were, because ultimately it's kind of done exactly what we needed to do. I think there's a lot of aha moments and kind of like big eye openings where it's like, that's such a simple thing to implement, and actually it's been a game changer for where we were versus where we are now, and what we needed to change in order to kind of see the positive impact.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And talking about that, I've only been in this space for a little while, as you know. I know we've only met a few times through around a golf here and there, and a few recommendations, and it's just the fact that people are so willing just to share, and yeah, it's a class place to be, as you say, and especially because e-com, with regards to the brand and the retail side, is something that gets us excited as well, isn't it, in terms of delivering them projects as well.
I think, yeah, one of the things I love about the e-com space is, although we talk about competitors and other agencies, a lot of those competitor agencies are partner agencies. So we don't see them as competitors, although we might come up against them in proposals and pitches and that kind of thing. I find, compared to other industries and other sectors perhaps, where it's a little bit more aggressive in terms of competition, we partner with a lot of agencies that ultimately, yes, we might come up against them, but at the same time there might be proposals and pitches that they can't pitch for because the work might not be at their entry level in terms of offering or pricing. So for example, they would then refer and recommend to us. So there's a lot of that within the space. So although they're deemed as competitors, it's not a negative kind of connotation of competitor in terms of they're the enemy. It's very much not that case. But yeah, within e-commerce, I think whilst there's a lot of that, there's also a lot of positive influence, a lot of positive conversation. There seems to be a lot of willingness from people to share quite a lot, whereas other industry, it's very closed book that actually this is the way we do it. We're not going to tell you what we do. Especially within the Shopify space, I find there's a lot of agencies that are quite willing to share process, operations, tools that they're using, experience they've had with clients, where, again, that would be deemed in any other sector as you don't talk about the negative stuff that happens, a bad experience that your business and your agency perhaps has had. Like, you don't talk about that, whereas actually it seems to be almost like an ongoing joke that clients or other agencies, are quite happy to kind of talk about within our space to ensure that those mistakes aren't happening among other agencies. So yeah, it's a very different space to, I think, a lot of other sectors and a lot of other industries for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just putting the face here for people who aren't watching, because within recruitment, like, you would never get two recruiters, like two rival agencies, sitting in a room together talking about like their clients or who they placed or whatever, because it just doesn't happen. Like, and it's backwards in terms of why recruiters aren't maybe like working together with stuff. And there's things that I'm very keen to do. Like, I'm happy to partner with companies who provide different services that we don't in that recruitment space, or, as I just say, long term, like the partnership you build is a much bigger one than trying to get one over on your competitors all the time.
Yeah, and you wouldn't share, I don't know, terms, you wouldn't share fees, you definitely wouldn't share your documents or your agreements or anything like that, because again, it kind of gives them the leg up, whereas in our space, it seems that everything seems to get circulated, everyone's quite happy to do so. Everyone kind of knows as well, like, what each other's benchmark is in terms of like entry-level pricing and that kind of thing. Like, we know certain agencies, they might start at 60k. We know some of the bigger ones, they might, their builds might look at the 100 to 150k bracket, for example. We know some of them are 250 up to 5 or 600k. So those are the agencies that ultimately we partner with, because we're not pricing at 250k. But we're also not at the other end of the spectrum where we're pricing at 5, 10k, for example. So we're sitting in the middle, and there's agencies that we can partner with where we can benefit from some of the referrals that are coming our way. And ultimately, it goes the other way too. We might have a massive enterprise level brand come to us, which we have had happen. We've had 2 or 3 this year, where they're wanting to spend 250 up to 400 or 500 grand, where we probably can't service that level of client. So that's where we would then refer up the chain, and actually we would give it to one of the partners, because yeah, it's not the right fit for us. We haven't got perhaps the time or the team to support a super enterprise level business like that, whereas we know what is the right size client for us in terms of turnover, in terms of team, in terms of what it is they're looking for. We know what we can and can't achieve, and often builds like that we would pass further on, because we know it's not the right fit for us, and it would sap too much time and resource for us, and that actually it's a good one to pass on.
Yeah, I was sitting in the room last week, and there were 3 agencies talking about a pitch that none of them had won. And there must have been a 4th name in the hat that no one could work out who it was, who had won that pitch. And they were saying, well, I thought you won it. And I thought you won it. And it was like, just, they're more just sitting there like, laughing and joking about it. Like, it wasn't the case of, whatever it was. It was just a bit bizarre, I guess, like, from seeing it from the outsider's point of view. But anyway, going back to like yourself, Tom, like, you've mentioned that you're now a Shopify Plus agency. For people who don't, I guess, understand what that means, like, what's the difference from being a Shopify Plus agency to just being like a Shopify agency? What's the biggest sort of difference?
Yeah, so I think there's quite a lot of stigma around the status kind of thing within the Shopify space. A lot of agencies, I think, very much want to be positioned as a plus agency, but ultimately you can't use the terminology of being a plus agency. But what it means is that we're able to work with Plus on commercial opportunities with clients where there is the opportunity for them to move up to Plus, for example, or we're putting a certain amount of business Shopify Plus's way. It also gives us and our team a lot more resource and tools to understand more about the Plus side of things from engineers and from people within Shopify Plus. So our team get a lot more dedicated time kind of training with them. We get a lot more say in the conversation around the sales stage with Plus and with clients where there's opportunity to move them either up to Plus or to migrate them away from another platform, for example, over to them. So it's mainly around the support that we kind of get from Shopify themselves that allows us to provide our clients with more support. But there's other perks to it too, commercially. To us, but it gives us more support in terms of tools, resources, training, status to clients. Like, they will only look at Shopify Plus agencies, for example. Anyone can sign up as a Shopify partner, and anyone can become a Shopify agency and position themselves as a Shopify agency. However, there's only a small pool of Shopify Plus agencies within the UK. It's a rewarding milestone for us to have kind of reached, and it's been very positive internally because it's something we've been pushing for kind of years to get to. So it's very rewarding for us to finally kind of get to that stage.
Nice, mate. Congratulations as well. And then in terms of WIRO, then, not talking about the agency itself, you've mentioned this a few times, like culture and people being so important. How have you, I guess, kept the core values that are so close to your heart within the team that you've been building at WIRO?
I think during, going back to earlier in the conversation where you said about some of the learnings, I think having been in positions before where it was stressful, where we were losing money on projects, for example, where we didn't have processes in place, therefore resource wasn't lined up, or not the right amount of resource was lined up, and therefore project goes to go live and you have to then reallocate a load of resource at the last minute, which ultimately costs you more money, for example. So loads of those learnings meant that moving forwards, we don't want that again. So how can we prevent that from happening? So a lot of that was invest time and money into process. The knock-on effect was our team weren't having to be pulled from pillar to post, and that's again a positive kind of impact on the dynamic internally. There's nothing worse than probably getting frustrated when you're within an agency around your workload, how your work's being planned, being pulled from pillar to post from this client to this client to this client. So all of that has been put in place to prevent that from happening within the team. And again, profitability, from the learnings that we had, it's we don't want to be in that position again. So how can we prevent that from happening without it taking a negative impact on the team and the dynamic? Culture is something we've focused a lot on, but I think it's a really positive byproduct of the investment that we've spent implementing tools, procedures, processes from an operational standpoint. It's been a really positive knock-on effect of that, and then it's something that we can then work backwards from. So we can say, okay, we want to improve this within the team. How can we do that within the process? And it's kind of like this tennis game, if you like, back and forth. We want to improve dynamics, so it goes back over to process. We do that. It changes within the team, and again back and forth. So that's been really, really positive and a really worthwhile investment of time and effort internally over the last few years.
Yeah. And when you're looking to hire, do you look at, is it just skill set you look at, or is it more culture? What do you lean on in this? 'Cause I know that's a big thing about people talk in terms across all sectors. Do you hire the right person in the business or the right skill? Where do you lean on that?
Yeah, so we've changed our hiring tactics over the years. I think before it was very much purely skill set. Didn't really matter if the person was the wrong fit. It was just we need, I don't know, say a developer, for example. Culturally, we then found later on, okay, wrong person. Now we have to have difficult conversations. Wrong person, right time. And now it's we look for the right people, but it might not be the right time necessarily. So we're constantly looking to acquire talent, and this is something that we've been so proud of to kind of begin to preach around the culture that we've kind of built over the last few years, is that we can now find the right people, and there's there never is a right time. And because we're able to now plan resource in advance, months and months in advance, it means that we can start to go, okay, in 3 months time we need to be hiring for a developer, for example. So we can start putting out for that role now. If we get someone in 3 weeks' time, great, because we know we need it in 3 months anyway. But if it takes us the 3 months, we've given ourselves some breathing room. So while skill set plays a part, I think we're more interested in, have they got experience within the agency space? Because anyone coming from agency to agency, I think, can often be overwhelmed. We've had people that haven't been at agency before that I think have come in and not realise sometimes how fast-paced it can be and how limited your time can be in terms of the split among clients. Like, you can have 5 or 6 calls on a sprint day, for example. So we run our sprints every 2 weeks, but that might be with 5 or 6 different clients. So whereas if you're in an in-house role or perhaps worked at a smaller design studio, the client pool might be potentially less, and therefore you're less spread. So I think skill set, yes, whilst we look for it, I think agency experience is another big thing that we look for. And e-commerce and Shopify agency experience is another big thing. If that ticks that box and they've got the skill set, the next thing we have is a 3-step kind of hiring process. So we have an initial conversation where it's very much just a screening, like, how do we click? Do we get on? Is there a bit of a vibe? Culturally, do we see them fitting into the team in terms of like the dynamic? Is there any kind of initial red flags in terms of like things that we can screen out, or we can avoid, or at least kind of prod and ask further questions around? The initial conversation is very much, hello, like, what have you been working on today? What do you want out of the next role? Like, what makes you tick in terms of like working for an agency like ours? Very much just a screening process. And then 90% of that goes into the next stage, because it's like, okay, there's no reason why they wouldn't. And even though we might potentially have red flags, that doesn't necessarily mean to say we'd rule them out of the process. It just means this is something we're going to look for in stages 2 and 3. Stage 2 is a bit more structured in terms of a certain amount of questions, that kind of thing, that we'll run through. We'll give the candidates some prep in advance, but generally just stuff that we can get a better understanding of in terms of their experience within the space, within agency, within their skill set. If it's a project manager, an account manager, client success, designer, developer, or whatever, like, we can just get a better understanding for who they are, how they work, and what their experience of working with a team like ours has been to date. And then at the end of that, depending on the role that we're pushing for, so it might be a design or a dev-based role, for example, we basically have a challenge. So with the dev, it's like a practical and a theory, similar to like a driving test, where you've got almost like, you've said you can do it, now do it. But the theory is very much like, give us the strategy and how you would approach and go into this challenge. And the same with the design one. It's very much like theory, strategy, how would you approach it? And then design is obviously like execution. And then the third one is very much like logistics. So how do we see it working? Terms typically around like, here's what we're going to provide. Discussion around salary. Not that we don't disclose it, because we're quite transparent on our pricing for all our salaries, for all our roles that we have out at all times. But very much just kind of deciding on where they start, where we go, what progression looks like, what probation, etc. looks like that entire process. And then from there, it's like job offer, introduction, kickoff, onboarding, training. So we go into like a 2 weeks worth of training internally where we can get them up to speed. They don't hit the ground running too early on. We get them to grips with processes, operations, tools, our clients, the team, the different departments, and how they kind of integrate and work. So yeah, our hiring process has kind of been refined over the years, and something that it's quite easy now to go into when we know we're hiring for a role, because we know what it looks like internally within the team. But yeah, something that before we didn't have, and it was very difficult. It was like, okay, head of development, you have that conversation with that developer. Head of operations, you have that conversation. I'll have this conversation. We'll all bang our heads together and see like who is the right person based off of one conversation. So actually we found there needs to be multiple conversations. There needs to be like a ruling out process at some point. If actually they don't meet the criteria, they need to drop off at some point. If not, we're interviewing loads of people and wasting loads of time for the sake of it, rather than actually pre-qualifying candidates to get through to a separate stage. And yeah, all the tools that kind of go in parallel to that. So using things that are obviously helping that process.
Yeah, nice, very good. Oh, nice, mate. Mate, yeah, it sounds like you've got that nailed, which is good. And Yeah, as you know, like recruitment is a very tough gig, and if you get it right in terms of how you attract talent and keep talent, which is obviously hugely important, and it sounds like you've got that mix right in terms of actually giving people that the learning, the opportunity to actually voice sort of stuff they are going through, and it sounds like it's the right sort of way you're doing it, mate. So yeah, it's positive, which is great.
Yeah, it's made things a lot easier when hiring.
Yeah, I bet. The last one, Tom, to sort of wrap up would be like, what are your 3 key like takeaways, would you say, for like scaling the workforce and maintaining that culture? Like, what would you say? You sort of talked to me a little bit there, but like 3 like punchy sort of things you say, like takeaways you'd learnt.
Don't hire without the processes, the operations, everything in place until you have that, or have a very standard or like minimum level of that. In hindsight, like looking back, we hired too early, although it should have been earlier. Had we have had the processes, we could have done, but we didn't. We got the people, then we set the processes, because we brought the people on board to set the processes. So it's a catch-22, but if you're carrying out operations and you're a smaller agency or a studio and you're still doing a lot of that yourself, document what you do, time track where your time's spent, put processes in place, bring in people that can start to take some of those responsibilities away from you, give accountability to them, put processes in place that they can carry out, hire the person, they come in to execute. In hindsight, we should have done that earlier. We didn't have it, so we had to strip back and then we had to go again. So yeah, I think that's number 1. Remind me the question.
More about like takeaways of how you built your team effectively and making sure that actually they are right for the business.
Yeah, I think, okay, number 2, don't talk about how good your team is, your culture is, your team dynamic is until you genuinely have it. When we were in the stages of our growth, we saw so many bigger agencies talking about how good it is and what a brilliant place they are to work for, and having inside knowledge around like so many agencies where actually we'd heard horror stories like it's not the case at all. And it's frustrating because during the hiring process, you're losing great candidates to agencies that perhaps are positioning is one thing, but actually I'm being very politically correct with my terminology here. But yeah, positioning is one thing, but actually turns out there's something very, very different. So I think that was frustrating, is that we were beginning to lose a lot of talent to that. And then the knock-on effect is further down the line, you're having candidates that applied for a role when you first hired it 18 months ago that we're now hiring for it now, that went to one of those agencies and now come back around. So that for us, I think is frustrating. So I think that's what we'd say is like, don't talk about it.
That's good.
About how good it is until you genuinely have it, because people talk within the space as well, and especially team that are within agency, like talk about other agencies to other agencies. So I think you have to have a great team dynamic culture, like to genuinely like talk about it on social to acquire that talent. I just don't think it's fair if not. Number 3. Strip back on tools and don't use too many if you can avoid doing so. Like one thing we used to do was like, rather than invest more in a set tool, we'd be like, right, we can use that same allocation of budget and spend to 4 or 5 different tools. And actually what we found was we'd rather compromise ever so slightly on perhaps the way another tool works if it means that we can actually get it integrating better with the same tool, if that makes sense. So rather than using 15 tools, how can we strip that back to literally be 3 or 4 tools? It might actually cost us more money, but actually if the whole operation and the process of everything within the business is in one set project management space, for example, so the whole business is basically structured on that, we found that has been so much better for us. Whereas before we were like, oh no, that's in Toggle, and actually that one's in Resource Guru, and oh, you now need to use Harvest for your time tracking. I can't find that. That's in the project management space. Oh, which one? Well, that was in ClickUp. So now it's like we basically put everything into a single platform, and it's made life so much easier for the team. It's actually meant everything's better as well in terms of like tracking our time, tracking communications, integrating email into comms within tickets, for example, between clients, between the team. our whole agency is basically now run on ClickUp. Operations, marketing, sales-wise, project-wise, retainer-wise, issues, bugs, anything and everything within the agency around how and what we're doing, DevOps, operations, everything is within ClickUp. So it means all our time is in there. Everything is in there. It can't get lost among different platforms. Everything is in there. Documentation, everything. So I think, strip back on tools where you possibly can and focus on kind of building out one core system.
Nice. Very good, mate. Amazing. Well, Tom, thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining us. And congratulations on everything that you're sort of doing over at WIRO. It's it sounds incredible. And Shopify Plus again, it's big news. So well done.
Appreciate it, mate. Appreciate it. Thanks for your time.